Oh, I'm so excited to be here with you, Beth.
Yeah.
This has been something I've been looking forward to all summer. Now that the autumn is here, it's time.
Yes.
I'm Jean Westrick. I am the Executive Director for the Technology Association of Grantmakers. And we are a membership organization that serves the technology component within the philanthropy space. And I've been talking a lot about AI this year. About a year ago, TAG released a framework for responsible AI adoption. And I've been out there sort of pounding the pavement, really talking about AI with grantmakers across the globe. I guess at this stage, I've talked to about 1,300 people this year. And so I want to just sort of ground our conversation in where are we now with AI. The era of AI is upon us. Before we dig into where we are now, I want to just sort of just recognize that the era of AI is really happening in a time of a lot of things are happening. We've got rising global uncertainty. We've got political and racial unrest and violence, deepening inequalities, and all this public trust. And so as we think about AI, it's happening at this time that's really destabilizing. And so it behooves us as grant makers to enter in this with the right amount of optimism as well as preparedness. So I want to spend a little time doing that. I'm going to zoom way back out, and I'm going to give away my age here. In 1995, I was a freshman at Michigan State, and I had work study, and I was assigned to the computer lab, which one of the things that I had to do as part of that was set up students with their first email address. This is the year that the internet breaks. This is the year that Amazon, Craigslist, eBay all go live. I don't think in 1995 we would realize that those are now some of the biggest corporations that have ever existed. And so I put this out there as a way for us to sort of think about the work that is ahead and where we sit right now with regards to the era of AI. So in 2006, Facebook, Twitter, the iPhone comes out in 2007. Those babies that were born in 2006 are now going off to college themselves. And in 2006, Time magazine called this, the person of the year was you, because of all the user-generated content that was emerging as part of that. And that was actually a pretty controversial cover. But we've now seen, 18 years on, of how social media has shaped the ways in which we work and communicate with one another. And so we see some changes that had happened in 2020, and our reliance on technology it really amped up because of the pandemic and what happened in 2020. And then in 2022, at the end of 2022, ChatGPT comes online. And so we have an opportunity as grant makers to help shape what that future looks like. So AI, I will say, is not new. It's been around since the 1950s. It really has evolved from machine learning to what we're seeing at present day. To ground us all, I like to think about AI in sort of these two big buckets to keep it very simple. AI is the capability of a computer to mimic cognitive functions like learning and problem solving. And generative AI is really the ability to create something new, whether that's content or imagery or some other type of output. So predictive is really about taking all that data and forecasting the future based upon the patterns of those behavior. Generative is about taking that data and creating some new content with it. So that's an easy way to sort of think about this. When we peel back and we think about what is happening in the grantmaker space, very few grantmakers are at the enterprise level using AI, just about 18%. Private foundations, the largest ones, as you could imagine, those would be the most likely to be using AI and the least likely to report barriers. Family foundations are the ones that are most likely to lag behind in their usage. When we peel back the onion, we do find that about 2/3 of staff at foundations are actually using AI tools they're experimenting on their own, usually with non-provisioned tools that haven't been endorsed or vetted by the organization, but they are using them because they recognize that there's a savings. When we peel back the onion a little further, about 2/3 of foundations do not have an AI use policy. We find about 30%, 20% have a policy, and about 9%, 21% have a policy, 9% have an advisory committee. And so we do have some governance in place, but there's still a real opportunity. And if we know that there are staff that are using it, it is the responsibility of our organizations to make sure that they know how to use them responsibly. I will say, this probably is not a big shock to you, but the kinds of use cases that we're seeing with regards to AI are pretty nascent at this stage. It's 71% are using transcription services in like the Zoom AI companion. About 2/3 are using tools like ChatGPT to draft some sort of correspondence or such. A very, very small sliver are using it to make grant-making decisions, just 2%. When we ask those foundations, what are the barriers to adoption, a couple things sort of rise to the top. There are concerns about data privacy and security, for good reason. There's also sort of a concern about lack of skill or lack of knowledge about AI. There's also sort of concerns about bias and fairness, as we see. That's another sort of data issue, accountability with regards to AI solutions, and on and on. But really, data and skills is two areas where we see that there is some opportunity there. These are the top solutions used by grant makers. I want to go back. So ChatGPT, Copilot, and Zoom. So really, these are pretty off-the-shelf tools, not whole things that are pretty, groundbreaking at this stage. But I know that, Beth, you have been talking a lot to nonprofits, across the country and across the globe, actually, about their maturity. I wonder what you could talk about with regards to that, and I don't know if you need that or not.
Sure, you could flip it to the next slide, but what you have shown in terms of the data from grant makers very much mirrors nonprofits, although I think some nonprofits are a little bit further along, so let's look at maturity. So this is AI for nonprofit work maturity stages, and here we're talking about mostly a lot of folks in the nonprofit sector in the first two blocks, which are explore, which is basically no strategy, no responsible use policy, and lots of bring your own AI to work, but don't tell your boss. Then experimental stage is where there's actually, it's been anointed, it's starting to be normalized as okay, and what that means is that there is a responsible use policy along with training and time for experimentation. So with low risk use cases, very much those use cases that you shared that grant makers are doing. And then we start to get into enterprise level, and this is where AI is started to be integrated with tech stacks, everything from productivity suites into databases. In the nonprofit sector, I think the fundraising departments are really leading it. It's not a surprise there.
Yeah.
And there's actually a new category of apps called fundraising intelligence, which takes donor data and helps fundraisers make better decisions, which ultimately brings in more and retained donors. And then finally, the exponential, which is putting the AI on the front line to interact directly with stakeholders to deliver programs and services. We see fewer use cases here, and the ones that we do see have had a lot of investment from foundations or big tech companies, and they have a lot of the things like an ethical pipeline and testing and monitoring in place. So I'd say most of them are sort of at that experiment stage. Fewer at exponential and enterprise, and also a group of them in explore.
Yes, and I think that this is interesting because we're early days for these sorts of tech adoptions, but we do know that nonprofits who use technology are more impactful and more effective than those who don't.
Right.
And so since this is here, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, I'd be curious just to raise your hands. How many, how many are in the explore stage? Okay, a few. How many in the experiment? Yep, okay. How many enterprise? Fewer hands. How many at exponential?
None. Yeah.
None, okay. Well, that's kind of what the curve is right now. We're right at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that there's a lot of real interest here about helping people sort of identify how they can use this powerful tool.
Yeah, and I think beginning, the most important concepts to keep in mind, there's two. The title of this session, being human-centered. What does that mean? The AI does not replace us. It does not replace human skills and intelligence. It's here to augment. And I'd like to talk about something called the dividend of time. So AI saves people time, right? It can do a lot of that scut work and any task, it can help you save time, but we don't want to use this technology just to do more work faster. We want to take that freed up time, we want to capture it, and we want to apply that to doing mission-driven, impactful work, or the work that only requires human skills, right? Like, the robots are not going to take the donors out to lunch, right? So that's our opportunity, really, to reinvent the work we do in the nonprofit field. The other idea is co-intelligence, with humans always in charge. So this technology is a little bit different in that it is a collaboration, but there's certain boundaries. The technology does certain things really well, like analyze lots of data and find patterns, but it doesn't know context, it doesn't have empathy, it doesn't have the human touch. And so when we use this, the human always has to be in charge and in the loop.
I love, you came and did a webinar with us, and I love how you talked about AI as your assistant, your teacher, and your muse. And that really helped me sort of think about, like, I'm in charge, but this is my assistant, or I'm getting inspiration or ideas, or I'm using it to teach me something new.
Yeah, most people feel like right now ChatGPT is a gum machine, right? Put the quarter in, pop out a draft, right? That's not the way to use it. I think, of course, you have to actually read what it says if you're using it like an intern. But there's enormous possibilities for learning and for brainstorming. It's really great to help assist you with brainstorming ideas, and then you bring it to the team to kind of prioritize and put it in context.
Yeah, that's very helpful. So there is a skill to this. So there is an inquiry cycle. Beth, I want to sort of step a little bit back, because we do know that there are lots of 2/3 of individuals who are working at foundations now are already experimenting with AI. These are non-provision tools.
Shadow use.
There's shadow tech, yes, like the shadow tech. So maybe you could talk a little bit about, how do we mitigate risk, or how do we make sure that we're not, stepping in or doing something that's harmful in the shadows?
So it's actually coming out of the shadows. And let me tell a little story first to illustrate this. I just read about this recently. It was a child protection agency in Australia, right? And the headline was, "Agency bars the use of ChatGPT for 2 years because social worker put clients at risk." Something like that. So what happened was this overworked social worker who had hundreds of court reports to write discovered that ChatGPT could be a useful tool, save some time, get some more reports done. But there wasn't trained on it. And so the ChatGPT got some things wrong about it that could have put the child in danger. And also, because it wasn't sanctioned, they were using the free tool. And they shared some personally identifiable information with some highly sensitive context. Luckily, this did not impact the child. They were still saved, but the social worker, after an investigation, got fired, and they banned the use of the tool. Now, I don't think ChatGPT is totally the bad guy here. If you unpeel the layers, the problem had to do with this. There was not a policy in place when this was happening, because it was at the very beginning of ChatGPT. And once there was a policy in place, there was no training on effectively how to use it, and also what is responsible use in practice. So we need those things to mitigate the risks. And there are risks. There's a continuum of risk, but for a AI staff skilling project, the list of the risks are things like bias. We know that they've been trained on information on the internet, a scary thought, and it's filled with bias. So you really have to have your bias detector on and processes for understanding if you are prompting it in a way that's going to produce a bias response. Privacy and confidentiality, especially for using public versions or you haven't opted out of training or not using the enterprise version. People need to be trained about what is PID, personally identifiable information, and not to share it. There's also issues around transparency. How do we disclose the use of this tool in externally facing content and so forth? All of those things are discussed and laid out in an acceptable use policy. And we could flip to the next slide. But it starts with our values. You know, it's don't cut and paste somebody else's policy. It's like wearing somebody else's shoes. You really want to have the conversation and contextualize it. And then norms. What are the use cases? What are the tools that we're using or not using? And then the rules of the road. That's my son behind the wheel the first time after he got his license, which took a year because he had a driver's permit, a written test, behind the wheel training. So the rules of the road cover all of the risks and practice how to mitigate them. And they're not to say don't use it, but how to use it safely, right? Yeah. And so that's the answer to your question.
And this really does track what we found in our data. You know, sort of that data says, hey, shore up your governance. If you do not have a governance policy right now about AI use policies, now is the time to start doing that. Number two, people want skills development. They need skills development. They need that knowledge to be able to adopt these things effectively and responsibly. And then I think the third thing is that AI is only as good as the data, and so we have to really understand like what's our data policy and how is that data being used, and understand that data is going to be a barrier because of issues around quality, the data quality, and in that data set. I think I have one more question.
Yes.
So let's say an organization has a use policy, and they're experimenting. And I think I gave away that. Hopefully that was okay. But
that's okay, you can flip.
I'm flipping to the next one. So how do they get started?
Okay, this is my favorite thing to talk about, and I know the clock is ticking, so I'll try to be quick and succinct. So there's a lot of things that go into a successful AI skilling strategy to really get it to scale successfully and responsibly. First, you know, of course, senior leadership sponsorship, but also participation. So the CEO and the C-suite also need to be modeling use of these tools. I think training is really important. Structured training where there may be prescribed use cases, but according to research and adoption, it really starts to scale when people are allowed to experiment, because there's, you know, you're only limited in use cases by your own creativity. So people need that time to experiment and to learn. And also a champions group is really important. And right now I've been working a lot with larger nonprofits who are bringing a champion group and giving them a playground with a high fence. And one of the things they're also being trained to do is how to talk to other staff about their concerns about AI. There's a lot of misconceptions. One thing we did with a champion group recently was we created a custom GPT that helped them practice their talking points. We fed in anonymized data from a survey of staff about what their concerns were, and the bot was trained to pretend to role play and be a staff person who was concerned, and the champion got to practice their talking points, and the staff person told them whether they were convinced or not and what to add. So it was a lot of fun. A playbook, have them test the policy, and more importantly, set your metrics for success and be able to start measuring that.
Awesome. Awesome, that's very helpful. Is there more slides?
No, that's it.
That's it.
We're ready for questions,
I think we could take a couple questions.
My name is Amanda. Thank you. Hi, my name is Amanda, and I'm, thanks, Vince. I'm with Ethnic Media Network, and I'm really pleased to hear that so many foundations are interested in practical uses for AI. I'm wondering if they will accept grant reports written by AI.
You're all funders, right? Are you accepting AI-generated grant reports? No.
Yeah.
Here's an answer.
I will actually speak to that because our foundation, the Jonathan Logan Family Foundation, recently received a report that was generated by AI. And one of the problems was it was generated by AI, and I'm not sure that the human who generated it even looked at it after it was spit out by the computer.
Yeah.
So I would just say that if AI is going to be used to help you structure a report, okay. But other than that, no, the people need to tell you what they did with their money. There's nothing about AI that could possibly know that.
Yes.
Right. And that gets into the responsible use policy and the training. It's not just how to prompt, but it's really about, like, what is your vetting process of the output, right? Like, looking at it, is it accurate? There's a term, ChatGPT likes to bot shit. I'll say that because Vince said bullshit. And you can't fall asleep at the wheel. You have to, like, read it.
Yeah.
You have to, like, use your critical thinking.
I've heard this come up a number of times from funders, and I have to ask, what do you care about? I mean, in grant proposals, grant reports, they are business documents or business proposals. They're not creative writing assignments, but whomever submits that has to stand by it, and it has to be accurate. So whether they use ChatGPT or a tool to help craft it, I think that we really need to think about that as something that could help, especially small nonprofits that are struggling with capacity. But at the same time, they have to stand by the work.
And use it responsibly.
And use it responsibly.
Hi, I'm Terry Tao with the Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies in Minnesota. Say what you just started to say about smaller organizations. I just keep wondering about additional digital equity issues, right? The small organizations run by communities of color, rural communities that just, again, are even going to be even more set apart from the ones that are much more savvier, right? The ones on the other end of the spectrum. And just wondering, like, what space for us, like, as we think about in philanthropy, to be continued capacity building that will probably be in addition to project support. Yeah. But any other thoughts about that?
Yes,
I
do. I have lots of thoughts. Go ahead, Beth.
I'll just really quickly, I work with something called the Resilience Initiative. It's a group of funders capacity building, and we've been doing a lot of generative AI capacity building with these small social justice organizations, teaching both effective use and responsible use and practice, and also, like, training them around, like, how do you, what tools do you use, and what are the values of those companies, and understanding, when, how to opt out of training, having your information train the model, and really, like, mentoring them and spending time and going slowly, but beginning to adopt those. So it's small steps, but so if you're a funder, I'd be thinking about capacity building.
And funding, technology. Investments in technology are an investment in strategy, pure and simple. Technology is going to be the way in which you're going to scale your impact and scale your reach. And I think small nonprofits, especially those that are led by people of color, are already behind with regards to technology investments. And so as funders, I think we have a responsibility to make sure that our nonprofit partners have the tools that they need in order to be successful. Technology is not a nice to have, it's a must have. We're about to be 2025. If you're not thinking about technology as core to being able to deliver on mission, then you're living on another planet. Sorry, that was rude, but I think that as you're all funders, and I think that advocating for your partners is really important in this space.
Seems like a good place
Okay.
All right. Thank you. All right.
All right.